All right, hello, Shauna here. I want to talk about a few things in regards to deadlifting or hinging patterns of the lower body. So let's go ahead and talk about this. All right, so first, there's oftentimes you can hear a lot of different opinions about deadlifting. People have concerns that deadlifting is bad for your back, but I want you to think about deadlifting as picking anything up off the ground instead of thinking about deadlifting as really horrible form that you maybe see on YouTube. So deadlifting doesn't have to be heavy weights with like rounded backs and grunting and spitting and all the kind of crazy things that maybe someone sees. Yes, I don't recommend poor technique with a deadlift. However, you do want to be able to properly hinge to have a good movement patterns for your lower body. So if you think about like double-legged movements for the lower body, we have our squats. Talked about that in a different video where we squat down and up, and then a deadlift would be considered a hinging pattern where you're bowing forward, reaching down for something. And you want to be able to confidently do both of those movements, just based upon the situation. But I have seen people in the past where they have had maybe a low back injury or whatnot, and they start to avoid a hinging pattern to protect the low back. But then sometimes what happens is then they overload the knees because oftentimes they'll kind of do this funky squat where they shoot the knees forward and try to stay really upright. So there's just different movement patterns and different ways that you can build and rebuild strength in the low back if you have had an injury. So that'll be for a different conversation. Don't feel ready to pick up weights off the ground, you can replace the deadlift with what we call a good morning. So with a good morning, you can walk the feet in, have the toes pointing straight ahead. And whether you're doing a good morning or a deadlift, it's going to be the same idea to start. You want to find a neutral position for that low back. So right now I'm exaggerating, kind of rocking my hips forward. I have a sway in my low back. So I want to rock the hips back, kind of pull the belly button in a little bit so I'm nice and neutral here in the low back. From there, I'm going to cross my hands over my shoulders. I can also go hands behind the head. For the good morning here, I'm going to just go right here at the shoulders to start. So I'm going to get just a little bend into my knees, holding my midline strong. I'm going to bow forward. So sending the hips back, bowing forward, looking down towards the floor so that my head's not extended. So chin in. And then from here, it's just bowing forward as far as you're confident, driving through the feet, standing tall at the top, looking straight ahead. So again, just a little bend in those knees, sending those hips back, bowing forward, chin in, looking down towards the floor, push through the feet, squeeze the backside, standing tall. So from the side, it looks like this, standing tall, just a little bend in those knees, and then sending those hips back, looking down and straight up. So if you just keep a little bit of a bend in the knees, you don't have to worry about rebending them each time. We're just looking to avoid this hyperextended knee position. I see this a lot where people will lock their knees out. My body doesn't want to do it at all and then stand. So we don't want to hyperextend, just a little bend, bowing forward and standing tall. All right. And if you've had some pain in the low back before, you can do a little bit of a check-in with yourself. We call it a waiter's bow, where you go into that bent over position, chin in, and you're just looking to hold this position for about 20 seconds, looking to be able to hold that posture without any pain, chin in, holding that midline nice and strong. And then after time, you would just stand straight up. All right. So that's just a really basic kind of clearing exercise to make sure that there's no pain in the back to use that position. Okay. So again, anytime that we are doing deadlift, if you don't feel ready to pick something up off the ground, or if your back's a little bit stiff, you could always sub in that good morning as an alternative. All right. And you can hold weights with a good morning. I could hold a kettlebell against my chest and bow forward with a little bit of weight. Okay, you can even get fancy if you have the flexibility, and you can hold it behind the back and then bow forward here. Okay, so there's different ways to utilize weight. If you didn't have a kettlebell, I can also use a dumbbell or any random object, hold it up underneath my chin. Same idea there, bowing forward, squeeze the backside or your glutes as you stand. Okay, so that's the good morning. From there, let's talk about, as we do get ready to deadlift, we want to pay attention to our current flexibility to determine how far down should I go to pick something up off the ground. So we utilize a standing toe touch test to see what your range of motion currently is. So you're going to walk your feet in so the toes are pointing straight ahead. Start standing nice and tall. Bring the chin down to your chest And then nice and smooth, slide the hands down the thighs. And now I've just allowed my back to round a little bit as I reach down for the toes. And you're just going to determine where's your starting position here. So if you're someone that's pretty stiff in the back part of the body, then you might find that you're only going to the knees or mid shin. If it's tough for you, if you can't quite get down to the toes or to the floor, then when you're going to deadlift, you may not want to go all the way down, depending upon the weight. So in this position, this weight is lifted off the ground pretty well. You may be just fine. What you want to avoid is as you're hinging over, people that are stiff in those hamstrings, they can't quite hinge properly and they tend to kind of round through the low back to compensate for the hamstring positioning. So pay attention to that. So what would that look like if I'm not going all the way down? I'd obviously pick it up off the ground to start, but then standing tall, shoulders back. I would hinge back at the hips so the movement starts like that good morning. Instead of taking the weight all the way to the floor, I would just take it about knee height. So tall chest, send the hips back, push the knees out just a little bit, bringing it right down between the legs, and then standing tall, okay? All right, so this would be considered a sumo deadlift. I have my feet nice and wide, and as I hinge over, once I get about to the level of the knees, now I'm gonna bend those knees a little bit more, send the knees out, keeping that back flat. Push through the feet, stand straight up, bowing forward, sending those knees out, and lowering down. Now notice that I'm using my upper body to keep the weight close to my center of gravity. So what I want to avoid is that weight swinging out and away. The farther away the weight is from my low back, the harder it's going to be on the low back. So use your upper body to hold it close. Basically, if you're going to set it on the floor, I want the weight to set down right between my ankles. Chin in, looking down, keeping that head neutral. Push through the legs, midline strong. Stand, looking straight ahead. Bowing forward, sending the hips back, controlling down, and then standing tall, looking straight ahead. All right, so this would be considered our sumo deadlift. You could also do it with one arm, alternating sides, or all on one side. Okay, and you could also utilize a dumbbell. Sometimes I'll just put the dumbbell vertical, stand tall, bowing forward, standing up and down here. Okay, you could also use two dumbbells. And you could technically still do a sumo deadlift with two dumbbells, holding it inside the legs, but depending on your build, depending upon the size of the weight, sometimes that can be awkward. So with two weights, now I'll typically do like a two-arm suitcase deadlift, we call it, where you hold the weights on each side of your body, have your feet a little bit closer, make sure the knees aren't locked out, slight bend those knees, engage in the midline, and now I'm gonna bow forward, sending the hips back, still keeping those weights close. Straight up, bowing forward, chin in, looking down, and stand. So again, we're avoiding this swinging away position, in and stand. All right, so those are some of the main areas that you want to focus on in the deadlift. At the top, just a couple more points of what we want to avoid. So in the top, you want to stand straight up and down. Sometimes I'll see people arch back, and that just causes some discomfort in the low back over time. Not really a good pattern. So it's just straight up and down. Your shoulders should be stacked straight over top of your hips. Standing tall and controlling down. All right, so those are the basics of that deadlift. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and hope to see you in classes.